Hey guys, this video is going to go over making modifications in the math classroom. I'm going to kind of go over my go-to rules for making modifications that have really worked well for me and my students. And I'm going to go over a little bit about helping students with assignments, helping students with tests and quizzes, and helping kids get through the lecture or the lesson. I also have a couple extra things that I'm going to throw in that have really been successful in my classroom, and hopefully it will be successful in yours. So this is making modifications in the math classroom. Now, I kind of have three go-to rules for making modifications. The first one is going to be eliminate any extra problems. So this is going to be true for tests, quizzes. If you have problems that you are repeating a bunch of times, now don't get me wrong, this is different than practice. Obviously, we need to repeat the same types of problems in class. But if you get to the homework and you're doing 25 of the same exact type of problem, that's going to frustrate your struggling math people, okay? So make sure you eliminate those extra problems. If they can prove in 5 problems that they know how to multiply fractions, then that's all they need to do. Eliminating those extra problems is going to alleviate that frustration that a lot of people who struggle with math are going to feel. The next one is going to be focus on those big ideas. So you're only looking at your I can statements and those big picture things. If things are showing up on your assignments and tests and quizzes that you didn't cover in class, or you're doing those kind of challenge type problems, those are not the type of problems for your struggling learners. What happens in class needs to happen on the test and the quiz and in the homework. So only focus on those big ideas. And then last but not least, review and then review again. So please don't just expose struggling math people to a concept and then don't touch on it again until the test. You have to review and then review again and then review again. Most of my students, if I know there's a quiz or test coming up, we review a few days prior all the way up to the test. So we're reviewing, we're looking at those different types of problems. It doesn't have to be a big, long review. Like I said, you want to keep it simple, but just going back over those concepts as many times as possible is going to help those struggling students. So those are my kind of 3 go-to rules for modifying math instruction. So I'm going to touch a little bit on helping students through a lesson. So let's say your math, and I don't know how everyone's math classroom is set up. The majority of the time it does have to be mainly teacher-led, especially if you're introducing a new concept. You have to go through that gradual release where you're giving them notes and examples and things like that. So I have a couple different examples of notes that you can do. It's just going to depend on your student. So you may have to use one example for one student and a different one for another. So it's kind of different levels of support. My most intensive level, I would say, would be like this foldable. I use this for finding volume of a sphere, and I have a cylinder one as well. I put the formula first thing, and I do have a QR code in case they do get stuck. They can go check out Khan Academy and watch another person teach them in addition to the teacher. And then I actually just did step by step by step. This is probably for your most intensive kids where they're going to need to open it and know exactly what step to do. And they're very, check, I got this step done, now I can go to this one. This would really help your really struggling students. I've had success with this because it's very for those black and white thinkers who need the first step done, second step done, third step done. Another thing too, and it makes it come a little bit more alive than just looking at a piece of paper. So it's a little bit more interactive, and that has really helped my real struggling students. Another example of notes that I kind of just do for the majority of my kids in that collab setting is I give them a copy of my notes. Now, all of my students are expected to take notes throughout the class, but they also know that they're going to get a copy at the end of class from mine, so they're not as stressed. If they know they're going to get a copy, yes, they may miss some things, but I honestly would rather have them be watching the lesson and seeing those real-life examples in real time than worried about getting, all of this stuff down. And with notes too, if you can eliminate any extra junk, eliminate that too. That's just kind of the same with the eliminating the extra problems. Anything that you can condense out of your notes is going to be better for those struggling students. It's not going to feel as overwhelming. So what I do with my struggling kids, and this can work for at-risk kids or EL students, is they know right up front that they're getting my copy of the notes, but they're expected to also take their own, and then we can combine our forces and kind of work together on that. So they know they're going to get all the information, and they're still expected to take their notes, but it eases the stress of, oh no, did I miss something, when the teacher was teaching it. The last example of notes I have, I actually typed up. This was one of the harder lessons in my opinion. Probably math people don't think so. So I knew that my drawing could not do this justice, so then I have to go to the computer and make it so it does show it justice. So my angles are right, things like that. So I did type up the notes along with the diagram from the notes, and my students referred to this over and over and over. This could be another good way to, if you're worried about, if you don't want to go to the copier right after class and make copies, having an electronic version is going to be great for your kids too, because you can just shoot them an email or upload it to PowerSchool or whatever your outlet's going to be. But the main thing I would say helping students through the lesson is just maximum exposure to it, and having them know that they're going to get the notes at the end of class really eases a lot of anxiety about math. So those are kind of the 3 ways that I help students through the lesson, and they've been very, very successful for me. So let's go ahead and move on to assignments. So helping students with assignments. Like I said, the big thing you're going to want, and this is a very good one, is to eliminate those extra problems. If you're assigning 25 problems of the same thing, it's not going to end well for your students who struggle. Also, please make sure that you're not assigning things that are not covered in class. So if you assign those challenge problems to these struggling kids, 90% of the time they're not going to know how to do it, and they're going to hit frustration and just not do it altogether. Those assignments need to be completely 100%. Kids can do it independently, using those notes and things like that. So if you eliminate those extra problems, doing 10 over 20, it's going to be great for your kids who struggle. The only other thing I would say for helping students with assignments is anytime you have graphs or tables or anything, I always try to set that up for them. So this was a lesson that we were doing input-output tables, and I struggle with having kids draw these things out because we're not looking at their drawing ability. Sometimes we can mess things up if we're just drawing it in notebook paper, especially kids with those spatial visual issues. And so I just feel like it's a better solution to set it up for them, because we're not measuring if they know how to draw a table, we're measuring if they can do the math inside the table. So I would just recommend anything that you have table-wise or anything like that, I would definitely set that up for them prior, and especially just for those struggling students. That way it takes the frustration out of, oh, I have to make the table and I have to do the math. So that's really helped a lot of my students with assignments, is having that already pre-made, ready to go. Another thing I would say too, I use this book quite a bit. Mrs. Daller gave it to me to use this last year, and it's been a blessing. Anytime you are graphing or anything like that, please provide graph paper that's already numbered. Kids who struggle really have a hard time, drawing that graph paper and getting the numbers right. Again, we're not measuring if they know how to draw a graph. We're measuring if they can graph on a graph. So you're taking that stress away, and you're already providing the tool. That way they can just focus on the math. So that would be the biggest thing I would say, helping students with assignments. Anything, input-output tables, graph paper, make sure it's A, already numbered, and B, large enough so they can see it. That's another thing. Not only will it help your visually impaired students, but it will help any students, honestly. It helps me when I graph on these over the normal graph paper. So just keep that in mind for your struggling students, that anything that you can provide beforehand that's already done for them is going to make them be able to focus on the math that much more. All right, moving on to tests and quizzes. So I have a couple different strategies for tests and quizzes. Again, you're just going to want to make sure that you've reviewed a bunch of times, you're only focusing on those big ideas, and you're eliminating those problems. Those 3 rules go with everything in math. So here's an example of one. I would say this is the most, this would be one I would give someone who's struggling a little bit, but not too much. So what I did was I let them know what lesson it was in. I actually didn't eliminate any problems, but I put, in your notes, you're going to look at lesson 0.1. And so they knew where to go to find an example for that. I used this with a good majority of my kids this year, and it worked pretty well. They would take the Gen Ed version, however I would label or put on the board where to find examples for each. So this is one of the most least restrictive supports that you could give kids who are struggling, and it works pretty well. A little bit more intensive one would be just giving the test and, like I said, eliminating those extra problems. So, for example, it says find the volume of the solid, round your answer to the nearest tenth. I eliminated all of the repeats. These are all 6, finding the volume of the solid. So I made sure that all of the shapes were represented. They had to prove that they knew how to do the volume for all of the shapes, but I just eliminated those extra problems. So this is going to be like your middle of the line kids. Also, do notice that I did put the labels for them. I like to do that because it alleviates more stress. Again, the less stressed your kids are, the better they're going to do at the concepts you're teaching. So the more stress that you can take out for them, the better they're going to do. And then here's an example of one that I used actually my first year collabing. I had a student who was having issues. This was just way too small for him, and he actually, we found out, had some vision issues as well. And so what we would do is we'd make the test a PowerPoint, and we'd only have 1 problem per page. That way it was blown up. He could see it. All of the problem directions were there. They were in big font, and he had so much more room to work out each problem. It also helped with kind of that workspace. So even if your kids don't have a vision deficit or a disability like that, having just that workspace works wonders for kids who struggle. And really having that tunnel vision on, oh, I'm only focusing on this problem right now on the test is going to be great for those kids who struggle. So those would be my 3 kind of go-to test and quiz strategies that I've used and I've had success in the past. A couple more things I did want to touch on just that have worked really well in my classroom is I use a bunch of anchor charts. So here's an example. We do square root and cube root in our 8th grade math curriculum. And so after we touch on these, I leave them up for the rest of the year. I actually just stole them down from my bulletin board because they were still up. So I used a couple different calculators because, of course, every classroom doesn't have the same calculator because why? That would be way too easy. So it's going to take them through the process of finding the square root and cube root on different forms of calculators. So just any anchor chart that's going to list steps or show them how to do things, as much as you can, have that up in your classroom because that's going to help students who struggle. They're always going to have that reference. It's not cheating, okay? If you forgot how to do square root and your whole test is on square rooting, that's a little unfair. If you could just ask. A lot of times struggling students don't want to look stupid, and so they won't come up and ask. So having these is a less aggressive way to get the answer, but you don't have to go up to your teacher and your classmates don't have to know that you don't know what you're doing. So this would be another strategy that I would highly recommend. My students have had very good success with it. A couple other things too. I was an elementary ed major and I kind of just thought games were for elementary, but there's millions and millions, I'm sure, of games that are going to cover those middle school standards and above. So like I have a game that we played in my skill support. It's called Old Math Guy. It's pretty awesome. And it's combining like terms. So keep that in mind if you need to, if you're reviewing and then reviewing again and you need to kind of spice it up, definitely look for those games. It's a great way to get kids a little bit more interested in math and a little less pressure because it's a game. The last thing I wanted to show you too is if your regular notes aren't working for kids, I've also done kind of storyboards for my real big strugglers. So I would make like the 4 types of scatter plots, and I would have those in visuals that they could lay out on the table. And it's kind of just a little bit more interactive way to do notes. I also have had students, we had this out during the test, and this can be a way for your kids who want to do verbal, they can just point to it and say it's a negative scatter plot. So do keep that in mind too. There's a bunch of different ways you can do notes. Here's a couple other examples too. I did the types of scatter plots. I did ways data can be displayed. So I know we have a bunch of different, I remember the notes on this one, it was like a big whole paragraph on the ways data could be displayed. This is just a little bit more interactive. You don't have to make this for every student, but even if you were just working in pairs or groups, you could have this and it's just a little bit more interactive where they can move it around. Last but not least, I have one on a key ring, so it's always an easy kind of thing. This is going to be like more of a practice if you're into task cards. I've used task cards before and those have been good for my students as well. So I hope this has helped, and this is how you modify instruction for struggling math students. Thank you. Thanks for watching.